Hey, and welcome to this new live stream from Hadith Tech. Assalamu alaikum, Abubakar. We
Walaikum assalam.
today we are having Abubakar, which is Dr. Abubakar. Let's say is uh, the founder of Gradio, an MIT graduate, and he did his PhD at Stanford University. So, would you like to introduce yourself and what you are doing these days?
Sure. Thank you so much, Abdurrahman, for having me here. It's my honor to be able to speak here, as well as to all of the audience that's joining via the live stream or listening to this afterwards. So my name is Abubakar Abid. I'm originally from Pakistan, but I was born in Karachi, but then I grew up in the U.S. So we moved to the U.S. when I was one. I grew up in a small town called Friendship, Wisconsin. One of the very few Pakistani people there. It was a tiny town, like 700 people. I went to elementary school there, and then my family moved around a little bit. Ultimately, ended up going to college at MIT. So spent 5 years there doing my undergrad and master's. I was interested both in computer science and in electrical engineering, as well as in medicine, mostly due to parental pressure. But ultimately decided to do my PhD in machine learning applied to medicine. So I did a lot of work related to using AI to understand ultrasound images and ultrasound videos. So that was very cool, kind of, fascinating, intellectually interesting work. But during the course of my PhD, I started to notice this issue where, as a machine learning researcher, I was building these models, um, but the people that I was making it for, let's say doctors or clinicians in my case, but it could be anyone that you're building a machine learning model for, they were having a hard time using the model and understanding what its strengths and weaknesses were. And I wanted them to try out the machine learning model so they could tell me, hey, here's what the model works well on, here's what it doesn't work well on. And so at that time, nothing really existed to make it possible to turn a machine learning model into kind of a GUI or application. And so I started this open source library called Gradio, so Gradio .app you can find online. So started an open source library called Gradio, and kind of almost accidentally raised money from investors to start a company. I can talk more about that if you're interested, but started a company and then ran it for about a little bit more than 2 years, and then we got acquired by HuggingFace. So HuggingFace, kind of the leader in open source machine learning, joined them about 2 years ago, and since then I've been leading a machine learning team at HuggingFace, focused on Gradio, as well as something called HingFace Spaces, which is a place to showcase these demos. So that's kind of what I work on, making machine learning more accessible through demos. And throughout, kind of this journey, alhamdulillah, I've been able to be part of a few different cool projects that use machine learning kind of for the Muslim community. One of them being Tartil. So
Yeah.
some of the folks here may have seen this. It's an application that allows you to recite Quran, and kind of AI tries to understand what you're saying, and then if you make a mistake, for example, it tells you that and kind of can help you track your progress and things like that. So happy to talk about any of that stuff.
That's really awesome. Like you to be honest, I have like checked your story before, and I know some parts of it, which is really I would love to ask you a question about that. But like since you mentioned Tertiel at the end, I think this year you have shared a data set for Tertiel in a research paper, which is kind of related to the voices and stuff like that.
Yeah, sorry, I think you broke up at the end, Abdurrahman. Was there a
Yeah.
question?
So I was asking like what at your work at Tartil at this year you have shared a data set related to the voice and that stuff. Would you like to say how that story with collecting the data set started and the stuff related to it?
Yeah, definitely. So Tartil started a few years ago. Actually, it came out of a hackathon that was led by a great friend of mine, also named Abdurrahman, actually. But basically, what happened was there was when we started Tartil, there was this kind of an initial kind of gap of data, right? So we wanted
Yeah.
to create a machine learning application that could recognize what someone was reciting. And when it comes to recitation of the Quran, there's a lot of professional data sets. So you can find, reciters, qaris, reciting the Quran. But at the same time, most people, at least myself, we don't sound like those, reciters. We sound, our voices are different. Maybe they're not as polished and so on. And so what ends up happening is you end up with this kind of situation where you have machine learning models that you could train on that data, but they wouldn't necessarily perform very well when kind of the average person is reciting the Quran. And so what we decided was, we should start off by actually collecting data of ordinary people reciting Quran, and we were actually very surprised that no such data set exists. Okay. So we actually launched what was initially the Tartil 10,000 challenge. And the challenge was to have 10,000 recordings of ordinary people reciting, a verse of the Quran. So there was no machine learning model, there was no app, nothing. We just launched this platform where you could play, you could click the record button, an ayah would be shown to you. You would click the record button, you would recite, and we would record that along with the metadata of, which ayah you were reciting. And there was a ton of enthusiasm for this. So we went from 10,000 to 50,000 to 100,000. So you were able to collect 100,000 recordings very quickly. And we even had people so then we're like, okay, great. We have a base set of 100,000 recording, but we should also cross check these to make sure that they're actually accurate. So we had an evaluation platform where people could confirm that someone else was actually reciting the right ayah. And I think it became almost like addictive. Like you could, see how many you'd recited and things like that and how many you'd evaluated. So we end up collecting a large number of high quality samples. So now the Tertil team. So I'm focused on Gradio. I'm not kind of a day-to-day member of Tertil anymore. I stepped back a little bit, but they're doing amazing work. And now Tertil actually, as you mentioned, they released this data set, and it might be the first, as far as as far as I know, it's the first data set of ordinary people reciting the Quran that's been validated, high quality. And the goal here is to now build a lot of things off of that. It's to build the ability to to build. So you have like speech to text models, even in Arabic, but
Yeah.
really precise ones that are designed for Quran recitation that can be, small enough that they can run on your phone, low latency, to build models like that, some of which have been built already, but to build better and better models. But then also doing all the way, things like, tajweed correction and things like that. So we're gonna, inshallah, hopefully this spurs a lot of very interesting research.
Inshallah. And like this idea of sharing something related to Quran, I think it would be inspire more people to go and do research in that area, which is kind of um, like usually people from the MENA region or like Muslim people prefer to do something related to their not really their religion because like they don't want like they want to get like a good salary or good jobs, which is kind of hard to do when you just like focus on such projects.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like let's get back to your story from the university. So you start with electrical with computer science as you mentioned. Like how was it like for you with doing the undergraduate programs, and how was it for you to go to undergraduate program? Like what kind of challenge you had faced at that time, and if you were going to study again right now, what kind of stuff you would do differently?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think, honestly, it's a great question. I think for me, some of my personal challenges. One was, when I started undergrad. I think undergrad is like it's a very tumultuous time for many people, especially like for myself, when it comes to identity as well. So
Yeah.
when I had joined MIT, like my identity before that was math and physics. So during high school, I did a lot of math competitions, I did a lot of physics competitions. That's what I enjoyed, but a lot of the people around me were very, very similar. And I had initially a hard time. I realized that I'm actually no longer like the best person at math and physics. Like there are a lot of really, really smart people around me that that I feel like that have this calling and these talents and more than myself. So that was one of like the challenges I personally realized is like my identity is a little bit different than what I thought it was. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what is it that I'm actually good at, what are my unique skills, and one of the things that I realized was I actually really enjoy building things. One of the nice things about MIT is that there's a lot of like there's a huge culture of entrepreneurship around MIT. Everyone's interested in startups as well, and there's a lot of practical ways to kind of explore that. There are classes that are designed to help you like look at entrepreneurship, look at building web applications, mobile applications. And so I took one of those classes during my undergrad, I think first year or second year, and I became really interested in building web applications. I was like, oh, this is awesome, I love it. It's a lot of fun. It gives me this like creative outlet as well. And so I ended up starting actually during my undergrad a small company called Masjid Time. And what Masjid Time was actually a platform to help masjids, masajid, mosques collect donations very easily. And at that time, nothing like this really existed either, where like there was like a lot of times donations would happen through cash or through like physical pledge forms, like, oh, I'm going to donate this later on. And so we wanted to make it possible for someone to just go up to a kiosk, slide their credit card just like they do in a restaurant, and do that for the massages. So we built this like hardware system. We built a web application, a mobile application. It was a lot of work, but I think it made me realize like this is actually something I can do. And went out and we actually gave it to different masajids. We actually we had a subscription model that they used. It was very interesting. It was very cool. But that realized there was a tension in myself where like really like building stuff, but at the same time, I also want to do deep tech. I don't want to just like build this, like a web application that anyone could build. I want to get a little bit deeper into something. Because one of the things I realized with Masjid Time is technically it wasn't necessarily a hard problem, but from the business side, it was very, very hard. As a masjid to do a subscription where they are, like paying this like private company. It wasn't a model that really had a lot of expertise with before. So it was more of a business problem rather than a technical problem. So in my mind, I knew that the next startup I wanted to do, I wanted to focus more on the technical side. And so I was like, okay, maybe I should do a PhD to get a little bit deeper into the technical side of things. So I applied for a PhD. I applied to a bunch of different universities. I considered staying at MIT, but then I realized, you know what, I should kind of explore different things. So I moved to Stanford. And initially, I was actually working on the electrical engineering side of things. I was working on medical devices. But then I had an opportunity to like just dabble with machine learning, and I was like, "Well, this is definitely the way things are going now." Everyone I knew was starting to work on machine learning, and there was just so much excitement and energy in the field that I made the decision, which was very difficult at that time for me, but I made the decision to switch from hardware to software, basically completely. And then yeah, kind of from there, some of the other challenges during the PhD. I think one other challenge was trying to, and I think this is even more so the case now. I almost like right now. I think doing a PhD in machine learning is so tough because there's so much research coming out every day.
Yeah.
It's so easy to be scooped. You have an idea, you start working on it. The next week, you realize it's been published by another university, or at this point by companies are publishing research, machine learning research like that, just because the translation potential, the potential to translate research into application is so high with AI that everyone seems to be working on it. It's a very, very, very competitive field, even more so now. But even back then, I think that was one of the challenges. Was I'd work on ideas and then realize that, oh, this has already been done before. And I think I I remember working on something and then presenting it to my professor, and he was like, "Oh, you should read this paper. This was done in the 1980s." And then
Okay.
I worked on something else, and he was like, "Oh yeah, this is like you published last decade." And so eventually, I caught up to the state of the field, but it took a while. And so I think that's one of the challenges as well, is like keeping up with everything that's happened and is happening in machine learning is difficult for a PhD student. But yeah, and then the other piece also of it is research is a very long game, and for me, I really wanted to dabble in like and build stuff in the short term as well. So that's why I worked on various like projects, side projects like Gradio and then Gradio, and then it ultimately became the company that it is today.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like when you were mentioned like that research is kind of long-term game. So how did you keep yourself motivated at that time? Like when your
Yeah,
professor would tell you something that it was done 20 or 30 years ago, how would you keep like moving up with this kind of news?
yeah, it's a great question. I think part of it was one of the nice things about machine learning is you can easily test if something is working. Like you don't
Yeah.
need a whole lab. Like just on your laptop, you can try out something. You can see, oh, this actually works. And so one of the nice things that one of the things that I actually recommend anyone who's starting off as a PhD student to do is to join an existing project. It's more important than because what ends up happening, I think, is when you start with your PhD, you have like all these random ideas, but you really don't know if those ideas are good or not. So it takes a little while to develop that research taste where you realize that these are actually good ideas that are valuable, objectively valuable, but also then valuable to the field. like this is something that can be published, this is something other researchers will care about, that takes a little bit of time to develop that taste. And I think this is very, very important. So initially, probably the best thing that you can do is to join an existing project where you might not be leading that project. You might not, it might not be your own original idea, but it might have some more senior PhD students or even postdocs working on it that have already validated that first test that this is a good idea. And then you
Yeah.
learn, you learn by doing, you join these projects. And so one of the first actual published, so I worked on a project that I came up with myself, and it was very interesting. I spent a lot of spent like 9 months on this project. It was very theoretical, but we had a very hard time publishing it just because it's so niche and not many people were interested. So the first project that I actually published during my PhD was something called contrastive PCA. It was like an adaptation of PCA, which is a very famous machine learning method. And what ended up happening was that was a project with some more senior PhD students. And so that, in working with other people, gave me that motivation that, oh, okay, this is important. Let me work on this. I'll do my part, they'll do their parts. And so that really helped a lot, I would say. And then kind of just seeing that the method worked, like you can generate data, you can use data sets, and you can see, hey, this method actually works. And so that was I think quite motivating as well.
Yeah, that's really awesome. For me, like, I get a question. Like, since you mentioned that you were working at, yeah, like you studied at MIT and you did that your PhD at Stanford, you had a lot of opportunities there, and the professors
Mhm.
there were like on top of their field already. So how would you like suggest people who are from different countries or who didn't have such like opportunity to move forward, um, how they could keep up with the information, or what would you suggest them to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I totally agree. Like right now, there is a very it's almost like a problem because it's the PhD applications and PhD research is so competitive
Yeah,
that in order to get into a PhD program, you need to have published papers already. Like it's almost like it's an unspoken requirement, but it's so competitive. People are coming in with papers published already. Like what do you do if you don't have those opportunities? And I actually was approached by a student like this from Turkey a few years ago, and he told me he was a senior, very very smart guy, definitely smarter than me. Like he had won like gold medals at IMO and stuff like that. But he told me he wanted to apply for a PhD program in computer science in the US.
yeah,
And I was like, okay. And I told him the same thing. Like, you almost need to have done some research because the main thing that they look at nowadays for PhD applications is like, it's almost like a job interview where they're like, is this person able to do independent research? And the best way to show that you have independent research is that you have, let's say a first author publication. That's great. And so I told him the same thing, and he was like, "Oh, well, we don't really do that at my university." So he went to Boğaziçi University, Turkey, and in Istanbul, and he was like, "We don't really do that. Um,
just a
can I
note
do research?"
here.
Sorry.
Boğaziçi University is one of the top universities in Turkey
Yeah,
already.
yeah,
So
exactly.
just like,
Yeah, exactly. It's already one of the top universities, but despite that, it wasn't very common. And I don't know if the situation has changed now, but it wasn't very common for undergrads to do, research.
yeah,
Um, and so he told me that, and he was like, "Hey, can I do research with you?" And I was like, you know what? Why not? Machine learning research is something that doesn't require a lab. It doesn't require to be physically next to someone else. If you have an internet connection, you can kind of catch up and do state of the art machine learning. So we worked on a project for about 9 months. I gave him some ideas, and then he like really ran with it. He did amazing work. And then that got published at ICML. And then and then he applied for PhD programs with that on his application, and he got accepted into Georgia Tech's PhD program in computer science, which is a very prestigious program. He got accepted, and it was straight out of undergrad, which is already very very good. And so that actually made me realize that there's a big opportunity here. And actually, I started something called Fatima Fellowship. And Fatima Fellowship is actually like this nonprofit thing. The idea really is just to connect aspiring PhD students with mentors from the US and Europe that can kind of give them a project, supervise them so that they can get a publication, so that they can get into good PhD programs. And so, yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah.
yeah,
So that's that kind of opportunity. So opportunities like that exist. We're not the only one. There's other places like that ML Collective. And more to the point, it's now possible for someone to kind of do this on their own as well. Machine learning research is something that you don't actually need infrastructure. You don't need a lab, like I keep saying. You can, if you have access to the internet and a Colab notebook, you can get very, very far. And so I think being able to kind of show that, hey, I can do kind of research, I understand the state of the art, I've built stuff myself that, I haven't published at a conference, but I can talk about it, I can write about it, I can publish in a blog. That gets you very, very far.
That's really awesome. Like it's and the idea of having this kind of Fatima Fellowship to support people would be really like inspiring. So since you mentioned that, I have a question from the audience asking about what kind of projects, which is like when you mentioning machine learning projects to work, that you could give an example so they could work on it or something like that. So do you have any suggestion for them?
Yeah, example. Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's so many. Kind of depends on it depends on what you're interested in. What There's so many subfields of machine learning. There's interesting projects. One thing that I think is quite interesting, maybe for many of the folks in the audience, is looking at examples of biases in machine learning. So this is kind of a very important topic nowadays. A lot of people are worried that machine learning models they're not just like these academic exercises. They're being deployed to consumer-facing applications, and they're not properly vetted. And so, for example, one of the things that I published a paper about this as well, as early versions of GPT-3 were very, very biased against Muslims.
Yeah.
If you would give them any topic about Muslims, they would respond with, kind of completions that were violent, or kind of painted Muslims as terrorists. And so when we published that paper, it got a lot of press, a lot of controversy, and ultimately, OpenAI ended up adding a lot of safety filters so that it wouldn't say like horrible stuff about Muslims. In fact, they even in their subsequent papers, they cited our work for their new models that
Oh,
they
mashallah,
that
that's
they
really
written.
awesome.
Yeah, alhamdulillah, it was great to see that
Alhamdulillah.
impact was there. And the reason that I think that impact is there is because it's just so um, it's such a big problem. It's so controversial. Like if you release a product and it ends up with these biases, like that's really, really bad. And so that was kind of fixed, at least at a surface level. But one of my students, as part of Fatima Fellowship, one of the things he found was, even though it doesn't say bias stuff, the completions oftentimes, so they would give Arabic complete. So they would give. So he was from Lebanon, and so he would give Arabic prompts to GPT-3 or Chat GPT or GPT-4. I can't remember which model it was, but one of these state-of-the-art LLMs, and he would give Arabic prompts. And what he found was the completions, they're not biased in the most obvious way, but they're biased if you look at the actual meaning of them. So, for example, if you said something like, you know, sharib, like I drank something, like the biases would not culturally make sense.
Yeah.
Like like for example, you would say like like drinking would be associated with like alcohol and other things, which is less common, less common in the Muslim world. So like they would not be culturally appropriate. Similarly, if you'd go out, it just like the completions would basically be translations of the English equivalent or the American equivalent. So you
Yeah.
have these interesting cultural biases there. So there's a paper on that now. But kind of the main point I'm making is a lot of these language models and other image generation models, all these have been developed with a particular kind of ethnocentric kind of perspective, and certain biases exist. And a lot of times it falls on we can't expect the machine learning model training people to have awareness of all of the biases in the world. But the cool thing about open source and when these models are released is that other people can actually test them, and we can play
Yeah.
around with them. We can say, oh, these are where the models actually fall short. And so I think training our own models that have these cultural competencies, or addressing trying to fix existing models, could be a very cool, interesting project for people to look at. There's lots and lots of other projects. I mean, I don't even know where to get started, but a lot of work right now is happening with mixture of expert models. So when you have a
Yeah.
large number of models, and then you route queries to different ones, that's something interesting, because a lot of the work has been with really, really large models that are hard to run. But it would be very interesting to kind of scale this down and see what properties also exist at kind of smaller scales as well. Um, yeah, I mean, if there's interest, maybe you can feel free to like find me on Twitter or something afterwards, and I'm happy to maybe bounce ideas off of people.
Awesome. That's great. And that's a really great invite, like from your side to invite people to connect with you on Twitter and stuff like that. I will share the links in the description of the video when we finish that. And meanwhile, I was thinking to ask you, how would people start to apply to Fatima Fellowship? How would they find it? And what would they expect when they are going to apply to it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so good question. So Fatima Fellowship it's a 9 month program. It starts typically around April, and it runs until December, the end of December. So like it's an April to December program. Typically applications open around February. So if you go on Fatima Fellowship right now, so you shared the link fatimafellowship.com, but there should be a link somewhere that says, um, let me see here. I don't know if it's live right now. Oh yeah, okay. So if you go to apply, so there's a link on the top right. It says apply as a fellow. Right now, the applications aren't open, but the wait list is open.
Yeah.
So you can go ahead and apply as a fellow. Sorry, apply to the wait list rather. When the application does open, then what's going to happen is it's going to be a list of questions about yourself. What is your kind of academic background? How much machine learning work have you done? Research work have you done? What kind of projects? What kind of classes you've taken? It's kind of just establishing how much machine learning knowledge you already have. That's one big factor. We also look at communication skills, so that's the second big factor. And like the third thing is like where the primary focus of the program is for international students who don't have the opportunities that many people in the U.S. or Europe do. So we try to prioritize people applying from parts of the world where they don't have opportunities. So those are kind of the three things that we look at. Believe there's also a coding challenge, or there was a coding challenge last year. I'm not sure if we're going to continue that or not. We might end up changing it, but those are kind of the key things. And then if you're accepted, we pair you with a mentor, um, and yeah, we pair you with a mentor, and the program starts like in April. Sometimes it starts a little bit later, but like April or May, and then it runs until December. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And when they start the program since April, like, do you expect them to have some kind of hours during the day? How the program works? Like, what
Yeah.
is the
Sorry.
mentor-mentee relationship that happens there?
Yeah, great question. So that's very important. But that's one actually. This is also a really really important factor is can you commit the amount of time? So
Yeah,
for a research project to take off, really it needs to be at least about half time. So about 20 hours a week. We say absolute minimum is like 15 hours. Can you commit 15 hours a week during this time? And this is not. I mean, this is not really like it's not so much. It's not for us really. It's just for you as a fellow. Like if you want to do meaningful research, you need to commit time. So we found that uh, some of the fellows we've accepted, they have not been able to, stay with that kind of commitment, and then they just don't get that much out of the program. But if you are able to commit 15, 20 hours, we've had very, very, successful fellows, like fellows applying, from Lebanon, from Iran, from all over the world, Egypt, Pakistan, and they're getting into really good PhD programs or master's programs at Georgia Tech, at U Chicago, at Mila in Montreal, like really, really good places. So yeah, if you can commit that kind of time, and then it's not really for the Fatima Fellowship; it's just between you and the mentor. So we
yeah,
pair. Our job really is to pair mentors, like qualified mentors, with qualified fellows, with students, and then it's quite decentralized from there. So like the mentor fellow, they kind of establish their program. But one of the things we tell mentors is, your fellows will be able to commit 15 to 20 hours. So that's kind of the commitment that we look for from fellows.
yeah. That's awesome. And like, when they join such a program, would the outcome of that program would be a research paper they share with their mentor, or would it be something else, or like, what is the outcome that they expect from that
Yeah,
beside applying
great
to
question.
universities?
Yeah, so it's not it does it can be different things. It's not always a research paper. Sometimes it is a research paper.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's some other kind of research artifact that they can point to for their graduate applications. So, for example, it could be a GitHub repo with code. It could be a technical blog post.
Yeah.
It could be a workshop paper, or it could be like it could be different things. It depends on how much progress is made. Um, but um, but yeah, something that they can point to when they are, or oftentimes it is a preprint on archive. So
Yeah.
at least what we say is at least take what you have and put it up on archive. That way, when you can put yourself as an author, it's a preprint that your admissions committee can take a look at. It's something your mentor can give you feedback on. Put it up on archive, and that way, that'll strengthen your graduate applications.
That's really awesome. And like that's really giving like opportunity to the people who are not able to get to that opportunities from outside the world. And to get back to your like conversation and opportunities, so I was going to ask about open source. And you mentioned that like right now we have a lot of open source projects that you could find, use, fine tune, or like define it for yourself. How do you feel like the impact of open source in the future for the people in general and for those people who are not like able to access to latest technologies?
Yeah, so I actually think open source is very important, and it's actually very tragic right now that a lot of um, a lot of like these major companies are not publishing research as open source. I mean, at the end of the day, like I really feel like research is knowledge, and it's like scientific knowledge, and it should be
Yeah,
freely shared. You shouldn't try to monetize scientific, in my opinion. Like scientific research should be something that's widely shared. It advances the whole field, and machine learning models are part of that, so they should be open sourced.
yeah,
Open source also has a lot of other benefits. So once a model is open source, it can be quantized. It can be, so you can actually run it on smaller devices. You can do different things like that. You can, run things locally. You can keep data private. It doesn't have to go anywhere else. It you can actually apply interpretation methods on it. So interpretability, you can look at trying to explain why a model is making the prediction that's making. So all of these benefits that come from open sourcing a model, and that's one of the reasons why I'm at Hugging Face, and one of the reasons why I think Gradio is so important is because it allows people to, like, right now traditionally it's been very hard. Like the problem that Gradio was trying to solve is, like, traditionally it was very hard to take a model that you had built, even if you wanted to open source it, to like make it accessible to people. Like 5 years
yeah,
ago, like most machine learning research, I'll tell you how it happened. A paper would get published, and then you'd have to hunt for their GitHub repo and say, oh, okay, did they release the models, or just the code, or what did they do? So it was a very uh, like it was a very just confusing situation. It was very hard to reproduce machine learning research. Nowadays, when just to set up their environment and use the model, it was just very difficult. Nowadays, most machine learning research, when it comes out, there's a Gradio demo or something associated with it,
yeah.
and like the bar for being able to reproduce other people's research is just a lot lower. And I think so. I'm very glad we're part of that whole open source ecosystem.
Alhamdulillah.
And then the other cool thing about open source is that it also allows the community to kind of participate, right? So you can participate in different ways. When it's code, you can fix code, you can fix bugs, you can add features, you can push that. Similarly, with machine learning models, you can also do the same thing. You can find issues. You can uh, instead of adding features, you fine tune the model. You can fine tune the
Yeah.
model, publish that model. You can do other things like that. So there's a lot of benefit there.
That's awesome. I think like when you mentioned like how the like hunting for the code for the people, I just remembered like recently we have projects like I think Papers with Code, which is was supported from which was released by Facebook, and we have Hugging Face, which is like showing you the models and what kind of type model and the under models that you have with that and all those things. And here, since you mentioned the Gradio again, so I would like to know how it's like you said the idea started as a necessity, which is like the mother of innovation is necessity. I think it's just like we have that saying. And how did it evolve to have investors, and how did Hugging Face acquire that after it?
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, you just broke up at the end. So you said you started off open source, the necessity, and then what was the last thing about
Yeah.
investors?
How did the Gradio started
Okay.
as a company, and
Yeah.
how after that, like how the stuff changed when Hugging Face acquired? By the way, I just remember that when you were mentioning about knowledge, You reminded me with the golden age of Islam during Abbasi Khalifates, and at that time when you have like Baitul Hikmah, the knowledge was, it's like you had the same idea, which is like everything we are sharing with everyone, and they
Yeah,
could like just move forward together.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think yeah, I think I very much believe in that ideal, where if knowledge is available to many people, the field just moves so much faster. And we've seen that actually, that recently a lot of in machine learning, like a lot of there's starting to become a resurgence of open source. Like in the last couple of years, a lot of the advances were closed, and um, I think it kind of sucked because like nobody knew how to reproduce those issues, like kind of stuff. But now things are starting to change again, and people are
Yeah,
kind of the open source community is becoming very strong, and they're sharing ideas. Literally, one of the cool things is people can take two models. Like one of the crazy things that has come up, and this would actually be very interesting. Oh, this is also, someone was asking about research ideas. This is one that I really find fascinating, is model merging.
yeah,
So you can take two models, let's say two models, each of which have 7 billion parameters, and then you literally merge their weights together. And there's different strategies for merging, but let's just say you take the average of all of those numbers together. Turns out that new model will usually be better than either of those models individually. Now, this is fascinating. Like, it makes no sense, but again, it speaks to one more. I mean, this is a kind of a like a very interesting manifestation of the idea that when you share things publicly, kind of things grow. The sum is greater than the parts, and it's kind of very interesting phenomenon in machine learning models. Um, so, anyways, to go back to your point, though, you were asking about how was Gradio acquired, and how did it
yeah,
grow, and how was it acquired and all of that. So how was let me talk about where Gradio started. So as I mentioned before, so Gradio started out of kind of my PhD interests at Stanford, and really just like the ability for us to be able to share our machine learning models. I talked about the clinical kind of applications. So I wanted to share my machine learning models with doctors, but there was also other cases as well. So, for example, I mentioned the field before. We had built these machine learning models, and we wanted to be able to share them with other people so that they could um, try them out themselves. Like they could, we have a speech to text model for Arabic or for Quran recitation. We wanted people to be able to try those models, right? So we wanted like a microphone, and people record it and all that. So this problem like was occurring in different places, and so it kind of in my mind I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if there's a bigger need for turning models into UI, like giving models UIs, basically, user
yeah,
interfaces, GUIs. And so started I started initially as kind of just an Python library, like it's an open source library. We just wanted to build it and release it and let people use it. There was no idea that we wanted to turn this into a company. That it seemed way too kind of like how would we monetize this? Like there wasn't a clear like business plan in mind. So I built. So then I recruited my roommates. So at that time, I had three roommates. Their names are Ali, and Dawood. One of them was from Sudan. The other two were from Pakistan. We just happened to be roommates in the Bay Area, and they all wanted to work on this. So we're like, cool, let's do this. Let's build this. And so we built it, and we would go to I would go to classes at Stanford and just speak about Gradio. And I remember after one of those classes, this a person comes up to me afterwards, and he was like, I have a quick question. I work as part of this investment firm in the Bay Area, and I was wondering if you're interested in starting a company out of this." I was like, "Whoa, well, I'd always been interested in entrepreneurship." So I was like, "You know what? This could be interesting. Why not? Let's take him up on the offer." And so we took some pre-seed money. So and it was like a small check. um, we participated in Pair Ventures, which is a very cool incubator in the Bay Area. They help give you guidance and advice on starting a company, and they help connect you with other investors. So we raised some more money. We ended up raising about what, how much was it? About $3 million. Yeah, about $3 million to run Gradio, and we ended up then um, uh, kind of just running this. We ended up hiring somebody as well and just growing the company, just focusing on the open source side of things. And then one day we get this inbound email from the CTO of Hugging Face, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to work together on something?" And we ended up working together on what became known as Hugging Face Spaces. So for
yeah,
anyone who doesn't know Hugging Face Spaces, so Hugging Face Spaces is kind of a place where you can freely host machine learning demos. So let's say you built a machine learning demo, you want people to go try it out and other people to use it. You can actually kind of build it, and you can build a demo and then you can host it for free if you're using a CPU, or you can pay a small amount for a GPU on Hugging Face Spaces. It was very cool and it was very beneficial both for Hugging Face and for Gradio actually. For Hugging Face, it brought a lot of traffic in, and for Gradio, it put us on the map. Like a lot of people learned about Gradio through our partnership with Hugging Face. Cool, very cool opportunity. Very cool experience. And then what happened was we ultimately we enjoyed working with Hugging Face people. They enjoyed working with us, and then they were like, "Hey, do you want to join us full time?" And we were like, let's do it. And we kind of talked. Our investors talked a bit, and then we ended up joining Hugging Face. Yeah.
That's really awesome. Like, how was, say, you start? Yeah, so here I just like get an idea. Like, we have a saying which is like, Yadullahi ma'al jama'ah, which is like, when you are a group, you have a higher, like, Allah with you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so how did you feel like having a community around you who were having the same idea would impact you when you worked on Gradio? And
Yeah.
would you go that far if you didn't have that community around you at that time?
Yeah. So sorry, when you say community, do you mean like the open source community, or do you mean my co-founders, or what do you mean?
Your co-founders, roommates, and
Oh,
Stanford classes,
yeah. Ah, yeah. Got it. Got it. That makes
like
sense.
that community that you were within it, like the community that no one from other area would be able to connect to
Mhm.
it.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. I mean, I think. The answer is for sure. For us, we would not have gone that far. Like without my co-founder, like my co-founders, for example, I'm a machine learning person, but I don't really know how to do front end, engineering.
Yeah,
My co-founders were the ones who knew that a lot more than I did. And they brought a lot of others. So for example, I was doing my PhD. All of my co-founders were in industry, so they had a lot more experience with industry and how it worked and all of that. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, absolutely. I think it's very much a um, very much something I benefited a lot from that community. And the Bay Area is a very special place. Like if you work on something long enough, an investor will find you. It's like one of those places where it's like harder not to raise money than it is to raise money. And I think
yeah,
having the support of investors obviously made it possible as well. Like, but I think at the same time you have to be a little bit careful. Like like I'm glad we didn't raise too much money, because that also makes sometimes acquisitions harder and stuff. So I would say for the most part, yes, but we also did have some challenges as well with our investors. For example, some of our investors did not want us to get acquired. One of our investors in particular, and it was kind of blocking the deal for a while, and that was a very very difficult time as well. So, anyways, to answer your question, yes, but you got to make sure you have the right people around you.
yeah. That's great. And from here, yeah, I just remembered like when you mentioned the open source community, just like the born of open source community was with 19s, with when Linux started, like Linux. At that time, there was a book called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. Have you heard about that book, by the way?
Oh no, I actually don't. What's it called?
The Cathedral and the Bazaar.
Oh, okay. I have not. I haven't read it or.
It's, that's really interesting book, by the way. So the main idea in that book that he mentioned, which was like the cathedral is just like how companies work, which is you have someone who is in the top of that and managing everyone under that, and the bazaar, which is like the same bazaar in Turkey on our region, which is like everything is going in an anarchist way, but like in decentralized way, and then
Uh,
everything grow together with that. So just like reminded me with that. So how did you feel like the open source community was feeling about Gradio, and how did it support you?
yeah, absolutely. So the open source community is honestly fantastic. And I think to your point, one of the really really nice things about working at Hugging Face and on open source is that you get so much immediate feedback on what you build, right? Like
Yeah,
most of the time when you're building a product, it's a closed source product. Like you have to convince people to try it out, and you have to convince them to give you feedback, right? Like feedback is so hard. But with open source, it's like the opposite. Like you release something, and because it's for free, everyone is willing to try it out, and that's especially important, I think, in machine learning, where there's there's a lot of snake oil as well. Like a lot of people promise, like they'll build tools that claim to do something like, oh, we'll build tools that help you find outliers in your data, or do active learning and tell you what data to label or automatically label stuff or something, or synthetic data. But if it's not open source, most machine learning like practitioners, sorry, yeah, most machine learning researchers or scientists, they'll be very, very skeptical. So in order to even just get people to use your product, you almost have to be open source, at least initially, and then you have to come up with some sort of like model on top of that. But like kind of freemium or some other sort of business model on top of that. But one of the great things is that you get immediate feedback. So it's just you get positive feedback too. Like a lot of times when people create issues on GitHub, they'll say, first of all, thank you so much for this amazing project. This saved me so much time, all of that. But also you start learning what are the other kind of needs that people have that maybe your project doesn't solve. Also any sort of bugs come immediately as well, but that's kind of the obvious one. So any sort of bugs, people will tell you immediately. That's great.
Yeah.
But like also like the other kind of thing is what are the interesting other kind of feedback that features that people want. So I'll give an example. um, so one of the things that that we realized in the early, so this is kind of going back to the early days of Gradio, was uh, so the first thing that we did was we built a way for people to build UIs in Python, right?
Yeah.
So traditionally, building a web application, you need to know front end development, CSS, JavaScript, HTML, all of that stuff. Maybe databases as well to like store data and stuff. And so we were like, okay, so can we abstract all of this away under a convenient Python framework? And we built something, and people started using it almost immediately. Like, in fact, there was a while where we stopped working on Gradio, we were pivoting to something else, and then we that didn't work, and we came back to Gradio, and we're like, oh wow, the number of users has gone up so much, even though we haven't worked on it at all. Like other people spread the word. That's the other cool thing with open source as well, is the
Yeah.
whole community becomes your users and evangelizers. But one of the things that we realized was that people also don't like web hosting. They don't like having to deal with domain names and registering, getting a server and dockerizing the contain, and all of that's a pain. So we ended up building this thing in Gradio called share links. So directly in Python, you add just one parameter, and it creates a public link for you that lets
Yeah.
someone try out your demo, your machine learning model, for up to 72 hours, while it's still running locally. Like a very, very easy way for someone to try out the demo that you just built. So you just built a demo and you're like, dang, this is pretty awesome. Let me share it with my colleague or my PhD advisor or my, you know, um, users, my quality testers or whatever. I just want them to try it out. And so you build it and you want to share your Gradio demo. And so you can do that in a matter of seconds, whereas traditionally it's very annoying. You spend a whole day trying to set up a web server. It's just painful. So that's something we realized that people wanted this. People asked about this. They're like, oh, okay, and then people ask, okay, this is very cool, but it doesn't work in Colab notebook. So we built something else for Colab. Like it's a very nice feedback loop between the community and between users. And the same thing applies for code, and the same thing applies for machine learning as well. Like when you publish a model, people test it out and say, oh, this is the kind of stuff it performs well on. And hey, I did evaluations and this model sucks at coding. Or it does something else. How can we fix this? So that's
Yeah.
pretty cool, and I think that's one of the things that really makes me very excited and very motivated to work in open source.
That's really awesome. And like I think one of the things in open source is just like not just like people who are trying it, and you have people who support you without even considering that like they open just like pull requests or issues in your repo and just like continue the development with you without expecting
Absolutely,
anything
yeah.
from you.
Absolutely, yeah. That's very true. We've had I think more than 200 contributors to Gradio at this point, and people have contributed sometimes very big features. I mean, it's
Yeah.
pretty awesome to see. Like, yeah, very nice to see big PRs. And then sometimes people just find typos in documentation and they'll just immediately fix it for you. It's a small thing, but it's very nice
Yeah.
to see that as well. Yeah,
And it takes time from you if you were going to do it by yourself for
of
finding the
course,
page, finding the file, and
of course,
publishing that again.
of course. Yeah, definitely.
That's awesome. And from here, I just like, since you mentioned time, I would ask you about how do you manage your time? How, like, do you have a very good formula with that? And the other question, which is be connected to this one, would be kind of how do you manage your time as a parent right now?
Yeah.
So we have
That's
like one of the time with which is when you are PhD, and right now when you are just like working on open source, having full-time job and doing research as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and being a parent to a 2-year-old, which is a crazy in and of itself. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, so I think one of the things is trying to figure out where you'll actually have the most impact on. So, and that's changed a lot over the years. But I think one thing that's been fairly consistent, one of the, I was actually thinking about this recently, is like one of the ways to have like more impact and to kind of stand out in your field a little bit is to be good at least two kind of independent things, right?
yeah,
So this is something that I think like a lot of people might be good at AI right now. You know, a lot of people are learning about AI, but not a lot of people might be good at not might not have that domain of like let's say Islamic tech. Or on
yeah,
the other hand, a lot of people might have that domain knowledge about Islam and Muslims, but they might not know about AI. But if you're good at like two independent things, then you can find a lot of like interesting high impact opportunities at your sector. So that's where things like Tertil came out of as well. Now that I'm at Hugging Face and at Gradio, my full time, my kind of 9 to 5, or it's not really 9 to 5, but oh, that's also one of the nice things about remote work as well is when you're being a parent, like remote work is like the best thing ever. Like it's so I don't know if it's always a good thing, but as a parent, it's amazing because there's so many like sometimes interruptions that you have in your day and stuff that you can kind of go back and forth. But like but anyway, my full time job is at Hugging Face, and I think one of the challenges for me that has been figuring out how to have the most impact at Hugging Face. The cool thing is Hugging Face is very much an impact oriented culture, so everyone like the focus is always how do you have the most impact, and my comfort sometimes lies in being an independent contributor. I see where I just want to write code, but sometimes my biggest impact could be on something else, like could be on figuring out how to empower my team, how to get people to collaborate on some feature together, or how to delegate tasks, or how to how to it could even be like something like I noticed there's a big gap in the documentation, which is leading to a lot of these questions and issues that people are creating. So maybe I should be focused on like improving the documentation to mitigate the issues. So stuff like that, I think figuring out like where the highest impact work can be, and then kind of focusing on that. But in terms of like what is my schedule like, I don't think I have anything too crazy to offer. I try to wake up a little bit earlier than I used to during my PhD. Staying up after Fajr is always like a very, very it's not always easy, but it's always like I always feel good when I do it.
yeah,
Try to get some work done before like the rest of my family wakes up. And then just find places to work where I'm not distracted, and nothing too crazy, nothing too crazy, I think. Yeah.
yeah. That's really awesome. Like the main idea of this question is just like raised to my mind when I saw a lot of like in our culture we have this idea of getting married after university, which is like for us it's considered late marriage, but like with that I was thinking about like how those kind of people would be able to manage their time if they want to do a research and if they want to do a PhD when they are married here. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So you're saying how do you kind of manage all of that? Like how do you manage
yeah,
it? Yeah, so good question. I would say, I mean, to be honest, I don't know if it I don't to be honest, I don't think getting married makes it that hard to do kind of research. I think being a parent, at least, I mean, I guess maybe every situation is a little bit different, but
yeah,
being a parent, you it definitely like adds a huge bunch of responsibility. But I think if you're married to like a partner who's supporting you, and kind of supporting each other, then it's not so challenging. I think one of the nice things was it brought a lot more structure to my day, because I
yeah,
was like, I really need to get home by like 5 or 6 or sometimes 7, but like I really need to get home by this time, and I need to wrap up work. Whereas before, like work would spill over late into the evenings, into the night, and I'd be like, I'm just working. It's fine. I have nothing else to be doing. So I think it kind of forced me to be a little bit more productive. I
yeah.
don't know if this happens all the time, but at least for me, it was kind of a nice constraint to add, I would say.
Ah, that's awesome. So you just like when you get that constraint, you just like maybe more focused, let's say, on the most important stuff.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, less distracted, during the day.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I have a few questions here from the audience. I will just check them.
Sure.
So we have this one from Little Coder. He is a big fan of
Uh-huh.
Gradio, and they wanted to show up just share appreciation of the powerful Gradio.
Thank you,
And
Abdul. Yeah, no, Abdul or One Little Coder is fantastic. His videos are really, really good. So if you guys if don't know about One Little Coder, he's you can find his YouTube channel. Uh, Basically, like cutting any sort of cutting edge, any developments that happen in machine learning. Uh, Abdul will have like a video the next day or that same night sometimes. So definitely
yeah,
check out his YouTube channel.
that's awesome. I
Uh,
will check that. So for those who are listening to this, it will be like one little coder, and one will be just like you write the number one instead of just having a full text for that. And we have a question from Albara. He is asking, how would they move to a good master program if they are in a university that doesn't have a research program during undergraduate program? So I think we answered that when we mentioned Fatima Fellowship, right?
yeah, Fatima Fellowship could be one cool opportunity. I think the main thing that you're going to have to do is to figure out how to showcase that you're actually quite good at machine learning. Or is this about machine? I assume it's about machine learning, but whatever your technical field is, you have to showcase that you're very, very good in a way that's independent of your university. So there's lots of ways to do that. So Fatima Fellowship offers one way to do that through research. Another way could be to work on machine learning projects. So, for example, training your own models or building machine learning applications. Gradio could be helpful because it's something that makes it very like concrete, and you can add it to your portfolio. If you build a Gradio application and you host it on HingFace Spaces, you can also embed it on your personal website and stuff like that. So it could be a good way to showcase that you've built something very cool. But yeah, that's the basic thing you're gonna have to look at. And by the way, I think projects like often I recruit. I'm as part of the team. I grow the team as well at Hugging Face, in particular on the Gradio team. And projects that are in line with what we're working on, they speak a lot. I'm always very interested when I see a project. I'll click on the link. I'll see what this person has built, and also being very good at communication. So being able to communicate very effectively about that project is also very important.
Yeah, awesome. And then here, I think like one of the things that we are missing in our culture, which is like, since we have this idea of being humble, so we
Yeah.
don't build any personal brand. So how do you feel about building personal brand with being humble at the same time?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually don't think they're exclusive at all. I think like yeah, it's a like there's like we've probably all know like arrogant celebrities. We can recognize like arrogance. Like
Yeah,
there's a big difference between like doing thing being kind of being arrogant versus, for example, building like showcasing, for example, what other people have done. Also, like if you're the type of person who'll highlight other people, this is actually one reason why I love like One Little Coder's YouTube channels is always highlighting stuff that other people have built, which is really awesome. And through that, like he's built his own personal brand. You know what I mean? Like they're
yeah,
not mutually exclusive. Like you can be a person who's part of the the community, the machine learning community, whatever. You can highlight what other people do. It doesn't have to be your own thing. I think what people value now is I would actually say people don't even care about personal brands anymore. People value things or people that provide value. Like if you're bringing information, like if you're sharing cutting edge machine learning news, if you're digesting it from one format to another format, that's what people care about. It's not about necessarily like being a content creator where all the content is about you.
yeah,
Okay, so when it comes to like resumes and stuff, it is a little bit different because it is about you. So that's where it does matter a little bit. And I think you have to be comfortable talking about yourself. I don't think about it as like showing off. Think about it as like, okay, a recruiter doesn't know anything about me. So what are the important things that they need to know? Like put yourself in the shoes of the recruiter. Like they should know, X, Y, and Z. And something that helps sometimes is if you read other resumes, like does it look like the person is showing off? If they do, then that's probably a bad resume. And most of the time a resume doesn't look like it's showing off. It's just you're learning, the key things about that person. So maybe read a few other resumes that can help as well.
yeah. That's awesome. How do you figure out like a good resume, like versus bad resume? How would you understand that?
Yeah. So it's a good question. There's, I mean, there's lots of things, but some of the things that I look for in a good resume is just like high impact projects.
Yeah.
Um, so um,
How do you define high impact here?
yeah, yeah, good question. Depends on the role a little bit. It's hard to speak in general, but let's say I was hiring for a back end engineer
Yeah.
on our team, and I've seen that, that um, there. Okay, so yeah, let's say I'm hiring for a back end engineer, and and like for example, one of the things that we're right now focused on at Gradio is performance. Okay, so like
Yeah.
speeding up the performance of Gradio applications, particularly large applications that are built with Gradio. So what I would look for is something like a I mean, I like, if someone has said I've worked with these technologies, and these are technologies that I know, like these are I'm familiar with. I think familiarity is important. These are like, technical technologies, and someone has said, okay, hey, I've been able to improve the performance. I've been cutting down the latency of our kind of networked application from this to this. Giving
Yeah.
concrete numbers helps a lot as well. And it's, either it's at a company that I recognize, because if it's at a company I recognize, like if it's a famous, big tech company, then I know that they already were starting off at a good place, and this person managed to help improve things even more. So that's like
Yeah.
impressive. If it's not at a company I recognize, then at least then it has to be very concrete. They have to explain exactly what they did. This is like seeing that impact written out, I think helps a lot. Um, if they're an early grad, strong academic performance is obviously important as well. And also then I look at classes, like whether they took the right set of classes. Like algorithms and like advanced algorithms, stuff like that could be important for a back-end engineer. Yeah, like what technologies they're familiar with, like are they familiar with the stack that we use at Hugging Face? That kind of, that's important. um yeah, but just like, yeah, just trying to just figure out, like, and then kind of the other thing also, and this is not always visible in a resume, but like, would they get along well with the team? Like, is there a kind of evidence of some being able to work well with the team? Like, okay, I did this person. Do they give credit to the other people as well? Like, just trying to figure that out. Although some of that becomes a little bit clearer in the in-person activities, as like in-person interview as well. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So that I think gives you a sense. Oh, and very very important is like clear communication. Like if their resume has like lots of grammar mistakes and stuff like that, it's just, especially with remote work, it's like most of our communication is written. We have very few meetings, so most of it is written. So it's very very important that they're able to communicate very like precisely and correctly. And yeah, I think that's important. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like when you mentioned communication, I just remembered like the last guest I hosted. One of the yeah, his name is Olabudi. So one of the story that he failed at freelance project because of communication, and like from that lesson, he learned it that hard way that communication is important, and he applied this kind of skill that he acquired from that to open source, and at the end he got like hired by someone who is working at GitHub, and they are
Mhm.
doing a project that they didn't release yet, but like I will host him again. Let's release inshallah.
Nice, inshallah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think like it's just so like it's a little bit of a cliche that communication is so important, but it's just like it's just so surprising how many times I get like inbound emails, or I get resumes that have like, that are full of like communication issues. Like, I think for a lot of people, if you're planning on working at, in a big tech firm or something, and your English is not that great, like that should be just as important as improving your coding. Like, they go hand in hand.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, yeah,
that's
that's important.
awesome. And I have a question here, which is related to that. You mentioned that when you check someone like someone resume, you see if that their stack is similar to your stack. But like sometimes the tech stack is different between regions and countries. How do you consider that, or how do you think about that? Because like I know, like if I want to give an example from front end example, you see like React is mostly used in Europe, USA. But like if you go to China, you will have Vue, and if you go with old companies, you will have like Angulars they are using, and if you go to Middle East, you will have WordPress mostly. So like with all of this kind of large landscape, how do you like compare people based on tech stack if they have
Yeah,
different tech stack than the one you are using?
yeah, that's a good question. The tech stack doesn't have to be identical, but like if all of the backend and front end technology is different, then I'm just sometimes a little bit skeptical whether or not they'll be able to hit the ground running when we hire them. So I think one thing is that like it doesn't have to be, yeah, it doesn't have to be completely identical, but like let's say they're familiar with multiple different front end frameworks, then I'm more comfortable that they'll learn what we use. So for example, at Gradio we use Svelte.
Yeah.
We used to use React, but we migrated to Svelte. Svelte is relatively young compared to the other front end frameworks, and it doesn't have as big of a base at the moment. Although I think it's like it's like one of the fastest growing ones, or it's like one of the most like well loved frameworks as well. So it's, eventually it might change, but the situation right now is it's one of the smaller ones. So when we hire people, we don't necessarily expect them to know Svelte. Um, but if they know React and then they also know something else, then it's like okay, they can pick up multiple, they can pick up new things easily.
Yeah.
So that's like sometimes it's a matter of like trying to understand whether this person will be able to adapt very quickly.
That's awesome. So
Yeah,
just like you mentioned, if they have different projects in different language, you would be able to measure if they would learn something new or not.
yeah, yeah.
Awesome. And from here, I have another question from. I'm going through the question by the way from the audience right now. So yeah,
Sure.
going back, we have a question from Abdurrahman. He sent three questions, but like mostly is how to Abdurrahman Odubashi. So uh, like to summarize all of these three questions, like how to find set of art papers and how do you figure out which papers we should read and not first to do our research was on that.
Yeah. You should follow Hassan Khalik on Twitter, A Khalik, if you don't already. So this guy will do the filtering for you. there are so
Awesome.
there's so many papers on published in archive every day, like hundreds. And there's a few like uh, folks who are doing like the hard work, honestly, of just like finding the important papers and sharing them on Twitter. So first of all, okay, I'll say two things. First of all, Twitter is the place to be if you're interested in like machine learning research. It's where a lot of like the community is on Twitter. They're discussing papers, they're sharing papers. So a lot of that now is also moving to Hugging Face. So Hugging Face is also a place where people are sharing papers and um, a lot of that activity is happening on Hugging Face as well. So Twitter and Hugging Face, I would say for now. And then people are sharing. So there's several folks such as Asin Khalik, who are sharing papers both on Twitter and then also on Hugging Face. So I would check those out. There's some other people as well, but I think Asin is probably the most well-known one.
Yeah, I think Hassan Khalid is already working with the Gradio right now.
Yes, he is. So
Yeah,
he is
yeah.
also. Yeah, I should mention that as well. Like this is work that he does outside of his Gradio work. So this he was doing this before Gradio. He keeps doing it. He's been doing an amazing job with this. Yeah,
That's awesome. So he's just like kind of doing both things right now. That's great.
yeah.
Yeah. We have another question from Amr Nashawati, which is, I think it's similar to this one. He is asking about research papers. And then we have Albara Maktabi. He thanked you for your answer,
You're welcome.
which when you answered about like universities and finding research papers related to that. So yeah, here we have all the questions. And like at the end, how do you feel about like research in terms of like people from different regions who are going to like AI right now? I think we have a high hype in AI. So how do you feel with this hype with the people going there over like the next 5 years? Would you feel like it will still up at that time or it will really grow down or how like stuff will go?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think honestly, like it's always hard to tell with these questions, hard to predict the future and stuff. But I think right now, what we have shown is that there's, unlike the hype of like, unlike some other waves, crypto and some other things,
Yeah.
like there's obviously a real business value that's being delivered through AI. So it's not like a fake, bubble or whatever. Well, it's not like completely that. It's not just the hype isn't just fake. There could be some um, maybe it's being overhyped a little bit. But what's interesting is that there's real business value being delivered by models like GPT-4 and even ChatGPT and GPT 3.5 and stuff. Yet these models have lots of problems, among which being that they're not open source, right? So that means you have to go through an API, you have to send your data, which sucks.
Yeah.
So at the very least, we know that there's going to be a lot of activity in the open source space in the next couple of years, doing what these models are doing a vision, doing audio, doing multimodal. So we know that at least for the next couple of years, there's a lot of activity that's going to happen. So I think absolutely this is the right time to join, and this is the right time to like make sure that these machine learning models work well in different regions, different communities. There's a lot of really cool applications, to be built on top of AI, because anytime, one of the great things about the AI kind of like gold rush that's happening right now is that some folks are building the AI stuff, which is the more expensive stuff, like they're training the foundation models and stuff like that. But then, okay, so there's like these foundation AI models, which is expensive. Then there's like the platform tools like Hugging Face that are making these models accessible to other people. And then there's the entire space of applications that now becomes possible on top of these models. So that is something that's, if you like, if it's too expensive or you don't know AI, whatever, but traditional software engineering, a whole lot of new applications should now be possible for you to build. So I think it's a very, very important time for every software engineer to be aware of what's happening in AI, and to start like there's going to be so many opportunities here. So I think we should be good for a while.
Yeah, mashallah, that's really great. And like when you mentioned opportunities, some people would think like AI will take place over engineers or developers, whatever it is, and then they will lose their jobs. Like, how do you feel about like what would you suggest to these people, or what would you say to them?
Yeah. So that's a good question, because I mean, I think I actually take a um I think a multifaceted view to this, because I actually do think that there will be some jobs that will be severely impacted by AI. So for example, if you're in like graphic design and you create photo assets for companies, um, that's something that is looking very dangerous,
Yeah,
because these AI tools are getting better and better at creating. You can provide prompts and they'll create exactly what you specified. They adhere to instructions very, very. They're just getting better and better at that. You can specify very complex prompts and they stick to that. You can put in your own images, your previous images, and they'll stick to those brand highlights and stuff like that. So I think that is going to be impacted. We already have seen copy editing. So like when you create like little like snippets for brands to use to market their materials, that field has been like replaced by AI basically at this point. Like 90% of the work is now being done by. So I think there are going to be fields like that. Um, Programming right now seems a little bit um, farther out. I think what's happening, like people have been trying to replace programmers with AI right now. I've tried a few of these startups as well. They're not very good at the moment. Um, right now, it seems like the primary effect in programming has been to speed up, productivity tools like GitHub Copilot and other things like that. So I think that's probably going to continue. I don't think programmers are being replaced yet. But what is really cool though, if you are, one of the things I've noticed personally is that if you're good at programming in one language, like for example, I know backend pretty well, but like front end I'm not that good at. But now I can quickly ask questions using ChatGPT or various other alternatives, get answers, and like get up to speed in another language. Or previously I would have had to pair program something that would have slowed me down quite a bit. So I think there's value in for I think so far the value for programmers has been net positive. Like I don't think we should worry too much about programmers losing jobs or being replaced. If anything, it should get people really like excited. Like now they can dive deeper and deeper into a topic and get immediate feedback. So I'd say it's a pretty exciting time to be a developer. And just like the opportunity as a developer, I think the opportunities AI gives you are just so many, many more. Like one particular one that I'm excited about is like, um, well, I'm excited, but also a little bit scared about how knowledge discovery is going to change in the age of AI. So, like traditionally, as like for example, like just speaking about like Islamic knowledge, um, there's a huge emphasis on like where do you get your knowledge from, right? Like you have to get it from a reliable source, and reliable scholar, for example. But we know in the last like 10 20 years, most people get their answers from Google. Like
yeah,
they just ask Google, and then the next 10 to 20 years, it's probably going to be AI, right? They're going to just ask. They're expecting ChatGPT or Google Bard or some other type of thing to give them knowledge, and that's an interesting thing because that knowledge is almost entirely stripped of authorship, right? Like
Yeah,
when Google Bard or ChatGPT gives you an answer, you have no idea where it's coming from. um, Authentication is very very hard. It's not just like the source, but like you don't have the context, right? So someone could have given a fatwa and then changed their mind, right? And like a website might have those details, but like ChatGPT might not know about that.
capabilities.
Right?
Yeah,
Yeah, it doesn't have that context. So I think for me, like one of the interesting, exciting thing is like how do we age of AI? How do we like figure out the right models for knowledge sharing and so that our children are getting reliable knowledge. So it's kind of an interesting thing for me. But
that's
yeah.
very awesome. You mentioned like this kind of having knowledge from reliable sources, which is like I think it's called al rijal in our in Islamic culture. So it's just like I remember like someone who did Hadith GPT a few months ago, and they just took it down because like that GPT
Mm,
model started to hallucinate with that kind of Hadith,
mm,
and it did started to provide wrong Hadiths, which is kind of something
yeah,
not
interesting.
unacceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are some good models I have seen. So for example, Ansari Chat is a good one. Ansari.chat, ANSARI.chat. Um, so if you, I'm just testing it right now. Let's see if it has something. Yeah, but you can try it. Is it working? Yeah, it looks like it. I don't know how good it is at hallucination or not. But okay, yeah, but yeah, we can try that. Yeah, sorry, chat. Exactly. Thanks for sharing the link. But yeah, I think I mean, unfortunately, I mean, whether it's a good thing or not is up to for grabs. But it's definitely going to be the future. So we have to figure out how to make it robust.
Yeah, and I think this could open like a very huge place for research, which is, as you mentioned in the conversation, and at the same time, when you reminded me when like during the golden age, we used to have this kind of scholars who are like familiar with uh, different kind of areas and fields in science, which could be Islamic science, which could be math, and then you will have like sociology and everything, which having that kind of stuff together, they have like higher impact than what we are having right now.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I think we are almost at the end of the conversation. So do you have any last words would you like to share with the audience, or any advices beside the ones that you already shared, or a book you suggest them to read?
Oh. No, I think it's just it's a very very exciting time. I think AI could be, you brought up the golden age a few times. I honestly think that like the Muslim world needs to get more, way more into AI, and it's amazing because again, like you don't need expensive like buildings, to do AI. You don't need chemical, it's not like chemistry labs, or it's not like, huge computing mainframe, like all of the resources to learn about AI and all the resources to run AI, at least, some levels of that, you can use for free. You can train models for free on Colab. You can host models for free on Hugging Face. There's so many educational resources on different platforms. I don't know where to start. So I would say like learn as much as you can about AI and yeah, let's usher in the next golden age.
No, awesome. That's really good. Thank you for the
Um,
advice, and thank you everyone who joined today. And hopefully we'll see you in another stream. We will be waiting to you tomorrow. We will host Dr. Matthew from Anarchy, which is a YC company, and inshallah next time. So yeah. And then, by the way, before ending this, I would just like have a huge shout out for Abdurrahman Adlibi. We hosted him before in Hadith Tech podcast, which he talked about uh, education for children, and he was the one who connected me with Dr. Abubakar. Thank you again for joining, and huge shout out to Abdurrahman. And Assalamu alaikum for next time.
so